The conference room fell silent as Captain Sarah Mitchell's file landed on the polished mahogany table with a thud that seemed to echo through the entire Pentagon wing. 3 senior commanders exchanged glances, their faces tight with concern. The mission brief for Operation Desert Falcon lay open before them, and Sarah's name had been circled in red ink multiple times. General Robert Hayes leaned back in his leather chair, his weathered hands forming a steeple under his chin. He had seen thousands of personnel files cross his desk over 30 years of service. But something about this particular case gnawed at him. Sarah Mitchell was 32 years old, a decorated helicopter pilot with 7 years of active duty under her belt. Her record showed commendations, successful missions, and the kind of steady reliability the military prized above almost everything else. But it also showed something else. Something that had 3 of the most powerful decision-makers in the armed forces questioning whether she should be anywhere near. Operation Desert Falcon. Colonel James Reeves cleared his throat, breaking the heavy silence. He was the youngest of the 3 commanders, with sharp features and eyes that missed nothing. He tapped the file with his index finger, his jaw set in a firm line. "Gentlemen, I think we need to address the elephant in the room," he said, his voice measured but firm. "Captain Mitchell is an excellent pilot. Nobody's disputing that. But given what happened 8 months ago, I have serious reservations about sending her on a mission of this magnitude." The 3rd commander, Admiral Patricia Vasquez, shifted in her seat. She was a woman who had fought her way up through ranks that weren't always welcoming to female officers, and she understood better than most what it meant to be judged on factors beyond pure capability. Still, she couldn't ignore the facts in front of her. "The psych evaluation," she said quietly, flipping through the papers. "It's marked as cleared, but there are notes here. Concerns about decision-making under extreme stress. Questions about emotional stability in combat situations." General Hayes opened the file again, scanning the pages that had been flagged. The incident report from 8 months prior painted a troubling picture. Sarah had been flying a rescue mission in hostile territory when her co-pilot, Lieutenant Marcus Chen, had been critically injured by enemy fire. The helicopter had taken severe damage, and Sarah had been forced to make a split-second decision that went against direct orders from command she had chosen. To land in an unsecured area to get medical attention for Marcus, instead of returning to base as instructed. The landing zone had been dangerously exposed, and the entire crew had been pinned down by enemy combatants for 45 minutes before backup arrived. Marcus had survived, but 3 other soldiers had sustained injuries during the firefight that followed. The inquiry board had been divided. Some argued that Sarah's actions had saved Marcus's life and that she had made the best call possible in an impossible situation. Others insisted that she had put her personal feelings above mission protocol and endangered everyone under her command. In the end, she had been cleared of formal charges but received an official reprimand. The black mark sat in her file like a dark stain that no amount of subsequent good performance could quite erase. Colonel Reeves closed the file and pushed it toward the center of the table. Operation Desert Falcon isn't a standard mission. We're talking about extracting high-value intelligence assets from behind enemy lines in one of the most volatile regions on the planet. The window of opportunity is 12 hours, maybe less. There's no room for emotional decisions or second-guessing command. If Captain Mitchell hesitates at the wrong moment or makes another judgment call based on personal attachment, we could lose everything. Not just the mission, but American lives and critical intelligence that could prevent future attacks. Admiral Vasquez nodded slowly, though her expression remained troubled. "I've read the testimony from the soldiers who were with her during the incident. They're unanimous in their support of her. They say she's the best pilot they've ever flown with, and that she kept them alive when anyone else would have panicked." "Loyalty from subordinates doesn't erase poor judgment," Reeves countered, "and it doesn't change the fact that she disobeyed a direct order in a combat zone." General Hayes had remained silent throughout this exchange, but now he spoke up, his voice carrying the weight of command. "The question isn't whether Captain Mitchell is a good pilot. The question is whether she can be trusted to follow orders when lives are on the line and emotions are running high. Operation Desert Falcon requires absolute precision and absolute obedience to the mission parameters. We can't afford wildcards." The general pulled out another document from the stack before him. This one was a personnel assessment written by Sarah's squadron commander, Colonel David Torres. Hayes read aloud from the summary section, "Captain Mitchell demonstrates exceptional technical skill and natural leadership abilities. However, she displays a tendency to prioritize immediate humanitarian concerns over strategic objectives. While this quality makes her beloved by her crews, it also presents potential complications in scenarios requiring difficult tactical choices." The words hung in the air like an indictment. Here was an officer praised for the very qualities that now threatened to derail her career. The military needed people who cared about their fellow soldiers, who would fight to bring everyone home. But it also needed people who understood that sometimes the mission had to come first, even when that meant making heartbreaking choices. Colonel Reeves stood up and walked to the window overlooking the sprawling complex below. Young men and women in uniform moved with purpose across the grounds, each one a cog in the massive machine of national defense. He thought about the assets waiting for extraction, about the intelligence they carried that could prevent future attacks on American soil. He thought about the teams that would be deployed to support the operation, all of them depending on every member of the mission to perform flawlessly. "I recommend we replace her," he said without turning around. "Lieutenant Commander Bradley has the same qualifications and none of the baggage. He's been vetted for high-risk operations and has never had a single incident on his record." Admiral Vasquez frowned. "Bradley is good, but he doesn't have Mitchell's experience in desert terrain. She's flown over 80 missions in that region. She knows the geography, the weather patterns, the enemy tactics. Bradley has logged maybe 20 flights in similar conditions."
Wow.
"Then we factor in extra preparation time," Reeves insisted. "It's better than gambling on someone who might crack under pressure." General Hayes closed the file and sat back, his expression unreadable. The weight of command had taught him that there were rarely easy answers to difficult questions. Every decision carried consequences. The burden of those consequences fell on the shoulders of people like him. Outside the conference room, Sarah Mitchell sat on a bench in the hallway, her hands clasped between her knees. She had been summoned to the Pentagon 2 hours ago with no explanation, though she had a pretty good idea what this was about. Operation Desert Falcon was the biggest mission on the board, and her name had been on the preliminary roster. But then the whispers had started, the sidelong glances from other officers, the sudden silence when she entered rooms. She knew they were discussing her fitness for duty. She knew they were questioning whether the incident 8 months ago had left her too damaged, too unreliable for critical operations. The knowledge sat in her chest like a stone, heavy and cold. Sarah had replayed that day 1,000 times in her mind. The sound of the bullets punching through the helicopter's hull. Marcus slumped in his seat, blood spreading across his flight suit. The choice she had faced in that terrible moment, caught between following orders and watching her friend die, she had chosen Marcus. She would make the same choice again. But she also understood why that. It frightened the people who made decisions about missions and lives and the greater good. A young lieutenant passed by and nodded respectfully. Sarah returned the gesture with a tired smile. She wondered what her future held if they pulled her from the mission. Would she spend the rest of her career flying routine transports and training exercises, forever marked as the pilot who couldn't be trusted when it mattered most? Inside the conference room, General Hayes opened the file one more time. But this time, he flipped past the incident report and the psych evaluations to a single sheet of paper near the back. It was a letter handwritten on military stationery, dated just 3 weeks after the incident that had caused all this controversy. The general's eyes moved across the familiar words, and something shifted in his expression. He looked up at the other 2 commanders, then slowly turned the file around so they could see the letter. "Before we make any final decisions," he said quietly, "I think you both need to read this." Colonel Reeves and Admiral Vasquez leaned forward, their eyes scanning the page. As they read, the atmosphere in the room began to change, doubt giving way to something else entirely. The letter had been written by Lieutenant Marcus Chen himself, composed from his hospital bed while he was still recovering from the injuries that had nearly killed him. His handwriting was shaky but determined, each word clearly formed despite the pain he must have been experiencing. Admiral Vasquez read aloud, her voice softer now than it had been moments before. To whom it may concern. I am writing this letter to address the incident of March 15th and the actions taken by Captain Sarah Mitchell during our mission. I have been informed that she is facing disciplinary proceedings for her decision to land in an unsecured zone against direct orders. I am writing to provide context that I believe is essential to understanding what actually happened that day. The Admiral paused, glancing at the others before continuing. When we took enemy fire, the damage to our aircraft was catastrophic. I sustained injuries that were bleeding out fast, and I was losing consciousness. Captain Mitchell received orders to return to base immediately, which was approximately 18 minutes away. The combat medic on board informed her privately that I would not survive 18 minutes without advanced medical intervention. The landing zone she chose was only 4 minutes away and had a field hospital with surgical capabilities. Colonel Reeves leaned closer, his earlier certainty beginning to waver. What Captain Mitchell did not know, and what I feel compelled to reveal now, is that I heard the entire exchange over the comms. I heard command order her to abandon me and return to base. I heard the medic tell her I was dying, and I heard her make a choice that no one should ever have to make. She chose to save my life at the risk of her own career and the safety of her crew. She chose humanity over protocol, and because of that choice, I am alive today. I am writing this letter. I will see my daughter grow up. Admiral Vasquez's voice caught slightly, but she continued. The firefight that ensued was fierce, and yes, 3 soldiers were injured. But none of those injuries were fatal. All of those soldiers have since told me personally that they would fly with Captain Mitchell again without hesitation. They understood what she did and why she did it. More importantly, they trust her because they know that she will move heaven and earth to bring them home. The room had grown very quiet. Even Colonel Reeves had stopped pacing and stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the letter. I am not asking that Captain Mitchell be excused from following orders. I am asking that the context of her decision be fully considered. She did not act recklessly or emotionally. She acted on the best available intelligence in an impossible situation. She weighed the life of one soldier against the risks too many and made a calculation that saved my life while keeping everyone else alive. That is not poor judgment. That is extraordinary judgment under the worst possible circumstances. General Hayes took over reading the final paragraph. If Captain Mitchell is disciplined or removed from active flight duty because of her actions that day, then the military will have sent a message to every pilot and commander in our forces. The message will be that following orders matters more than saving lives, that protecting careers is more important than protecting soldiers. I do not believe that is the message we want to send. I respectfully request that Captain Mitchell be fully reinstated and that her actions be recognized not as a failure of discipline, but as an example of the kind of courage and quick thinking that makes our military the finest in the world. The letter was signed simply Lieutenant Marcus Chen with his service number below. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The letter sat on the table between them like a challenge, forcing them to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the incident and about Sarah Mitchell. Admiral Vasquez was the first to break the silence. He makes a compelling case. And the fact that he wrote this while still recovering, knowing it might not make any difference, that tells me something about the kind of loyalty Captain Mitchell inspires. Colonel Reeves moved back to his seat, his expression troubled. Loyalty isn't the issue here. The issue is whether she can be trusted to follow orders on Operation Desert Falcon when the stakes are even higher. Is it, though? General Hayes asked quietly. Because it seems to me that what we're really asking is whether she chooses to save lives over following a tactical directive. And I'm not entirely sure that's a bad quality in a pilot. The colonel shook his head firmly. General, with all due respect, Operation Desert Falcon is not a rescue mission. It's an extraction of high-value intelligence assets. If Captain Mitchell decides in the moment that she knows better than command, if she deviates from the flight plan because she thinks she can save an extra person or avoid casualties, she could compromise the entire operation. The intelligence these assets are carrying could prevent attacks that would kill hundreds or thousands of Americans. How do we weigh one life, or even several lives, against that? It was the fundamental question at the heart of military command. The impossible calculus that generals and admirals had been grappling with since ancient times. How do you value human life when the mission itself exists to protect human life on a larger scale? Admiral Vasquez picked up another document from Sarah's file. Her performance reviews for the past 8 months have been flawless. She's completed every mission exactly as directed. Her squadron commander notes that she's been scrupulous about following protocols since the incident. Because she's being watched, Reeves countered. Because she knows her career is hanging by a thread. But what happens when the pressure is on and nobody's looking over her shoulder? What happens when she has to make another impossible choice? General Hayes stood and walked to the window where Reeves had been standing earlier. He could see the flag flying over the Pentagon, snapping in the wind against a gray sky. He had been making difficult decisions about people's lives and careers for 3 decades, but it never got easier. Every choice felt like it carried the weight of the world. "Pull up the mission parameters for Desert Falcon," he said suddenly. "I want to review the exact specifications." Admiral Vasquez opened her tablet and brought up the classified mission brief. The operation has 3 critical phases. Phase 1 is insertion into hostile territory using stealth approach vectors. Phase 2 is ground coordination with special forces for asset retrieval. Phase 3 is extraction under potential enemy fire. "What's the flight time from insertion to extraction?" Hayes asked.
"Approximately 42 minutes if everything goes according to plan," Vasquez replied.
"But we're building in contingencies for up to 90 minutes if there are complications on the ground. The backup plans if the primary extraction point is compromised. We have 3 alternate locations mapped out, each with different risk profiles. The pilot will have authorization to choose among them based on real-time assessment of enemy positions and threat levels." General Hayes turned back to face the others. "So what you're telling me is that we're sending a pilot into one of the most dangerous regions in the world, giving her authorization to make tactical decisions based on her assessment of the situation, and trusting her judgment to get our people out alive. Does that sound accurate?" Vasquez nodded slowly, beginning to see where he was going with this. "Then explain to me," Hayes continued, "how that's fundamentally different from what Captain Mitchell did 8 months ago. We're literally asking her to make judgment calls in combat situations. We're trusting her to assess threats and choose the best course of action. When command can't see what she's seeing on the ground, the only difference is that this time, we're planning for it." Colonel Reeves opened his mouth to object, then closed it again. The general had a point, one that was hard to argue against. The difference, Reeves finally said, is that she'd be following a predetermined set of contingency plans. She won't be going rogue and making up her own rules. "Is that what you think she did?" Hayes asked. "Made up her own rules? Or did she follow the most fundamental rule we have, which is to preserve American lives whenever possible?" The debate was reaching a critical point. Admiral Vasquez could feel the tension in the room shifting, evolving into something more nuanced than a simple yes or no decision. "I think we need to look at this from another angle," she said carefully. "What if the question isn't whether Captain Mitchell will follow orders, but whether we're giving the right orders in the first place? The incident 8 months ago happened because there was a gap between the tactical reality on the ground and the strategic directives from command. She had information that we didn't have. She made a call that saved a life. At the cost of following protocol," Reeves insisted. "At the cost of following a protocol that would have killed a good soldier for no strategic gain," Vasquez shot back, her voice sharp. "That's not discipline, Colonel. That's bureaucracy. And there's a difference." The room fell silent again. General Hayes returned to his seat and picked up Marcus Chen's letter once more, reading through it with fresh eyes. He thought about all the pilots he had known over the years, all the commanders who had faced impossible choices in the heat of combat. The best ones, he realized, were not the ones who followed orders blindly. They were the ones who understood the spirit behind the orders and had the courage to adapt when circumstances demanded it. "Here's what I know," Hayes said finally. "Captain Mitchell made a choice that saved a life. She also made a choice that put other soldiers at risk. Both of those things are true. But the soldiers she put at risk are standing behind her. They trust her. They want to fly with her again. That tells me something about her judgment that no report or evaluation can capture. He looked directly at Colonel Reeves. You're right that Operation Desert Falcon is critical. You're right that we need someone who can follow orders and execute the mission perfectly. But I think you're wrong about what that means. We don't need a robot who follows commands without thinking. We need someone who understands the mission, understands the stakes, and has the judgment to adapt when reality doesn't match the plan. Colonel Reeves sat back in his chair, the fight slowly draining out of him. He wanted to argue further, but something about the general's words resonated with his own experiences in combat. He had seen rigid adherence to protocol get soldiers killed. He had also seen creative thinking and bold decisions turn disasters into victories. So what are you proposing? He asked quietly. General Hayes closed the file and looked at both commanders. I'm proposing that we bring Captain Mitchell in here and have a conversation. We lay out our concerns directly. We explain exactly what Operation Desert Falcon requires and what the consequences of failure would be. And then we listen to what she has to say. We owe her that much. Admiral Vasquez nodded in agreement. And if she can't give us confidence that she'll execute the mission as planned, then we replace her, Hayes said simply. But we make that decision based on a conversation with the actual person, not based on assumptions and fears about what might happen. After a moment, Colonel Reeves nodded as well. It wasn't a surrender, but it was an acknowledgement that perhaps they had been too quick to judge. Sarah had been sitting in the hallway. For over an hour, when the door to the conference room finally opened, a young aide stepped out and gestured for her to enter. Her heart hammered in her chest as she stood and smoothed down her uniform. Whatever was about to happen would likely determine the entire trajectory of her military career. She walked into the room and came to attention, saluting the 3 senior officers seated at the table. General Hayes returned the salute and gestured to a chair across from them. At ease, Captain. Please, have a seat. Sarah sat down, her posture rigid despite the invitation to relax. She could feel the weight of their scrutiny, could see the files and documents spread across the table. Her personnel record was open in front of General Hayes, and she recognized the incident report from 8 months ago, sitting at the top of the stack. Admiral Vasquez spoke first. Her tone professional, but not unkind. Captain Mitchell, I assume you know why you're here. Yes, ma'am. Operation Desert Falcon. That's correct. Your name is on the roster as primary pilot for the extraction phase. However, certain concerns have been raised about your suitability for this mission. We want to give you an opportunity to address those concerns directly. Sarah took a breath, steadying herself. She had known this moment would come eventually. The incident with Marcus had been hanging over her head like a sword suspended by a thread. Permission to speak freely, ma'am? Granted, General Hayes said. In fact, we expect it. We're not here for a formal evaluation. We're here for an honest conversation about what happened 8 months ago and what it means for Operation Desert Falcon. Sarah nodded, gathering her thoughts. She had rehearsed various versions of this conversation in her head countless times, but now that the moment had arrived, all her prepared speeches seemed inadequate. I disobeyed a direct order, she said simply. I'm not going to pretend I didn't or try to justify it with technicalities. Command told me to return to base, and I chose a different course of action. I understand why that's a problem. Colonel Reeves leaned forward slightly. Do you regret that decision, Captain? Sarah met his gaze without flinching. No, sir. I regret that the situation ever happened. I regret that we took fire and that Lieutenant Chen was injured. I regret that 3 other soldiers got hurt in the firefight that followed. But I don't regret the decision itself. Marcus would have died if I had followed orders. I had 4 minutes to save his life, or 18 minutes to watch him bleed out in my helicopter. I chose to save him. Even though it meant putting your entire crew at risk? Reeves pressed. The crew was already at risk, Sarah replied. We were damaged, flying through hostile territory, with a critically wounded man losing blood fast. There was no safe option. Every choice carried risk. I chose the risk that gave us the best chance of everyone coming home alive. Admiral Vasquez picked up Marcus Chen's letter. Lieutenant Chen wrote this about 3 weeks after the incident. Have you read it? Sarah shook her head. No, ma'am. I didn't know he had written anything. Vasquez slid the letter across the table. I think you should read it now. Sarah picked up the letter, her eyes moving across Marcus's shaky handwriting. As she read, something shifted in her expression. Her throat tightened, and she had to blink back the moisture gathering in her eyes. She had never asked Marcus to defend her decision. She had never expected him to put his own recovery on hold to write a letter on her behalf. When she finished reading, she carefully placed the letter back on the table. I didn't know, she said quietly. He never told me. He was trying to protect you, General Hayes said. Just like you tried to protect him. The question we're grappling with, Captain, is whether that kind of loyalty is an asset or a liability for someone in your position. Sarah looked up, her eyes clear now and focused. May I ask a question, sir? Go ahead. What would you have done? If you had been in that cockpit with a dying soldier in the seat next to you, with a medic telling you he has minutes to live, what choice would you have made? It was a bold question, possibly even insubordinate, but General Hayes didn't rebuke her. Instead, he considered it seriously, the way he might consider a tactical problem that had no easy answer. I don't know, he admitted finally. I'd like to think I would have followed orders, but I've never been in that exact situation, so I can't say for certain what I would have done in the moment. That's my point, sir, Sarah said, her voice gaining strength. None of us know what we'll do until we're actually there. We can train and prepare and study protocols, but combat is chaos. Things happen that nobody planned for. People get hurt. Equipment fails. The enemy doesn't follow our expectations. And in those moments, we have to make decisions based on incomplete information and impossible choices. Colonel Reeves was watching her carefully now, his earlier skepticism giving way to something that might have been grudging respect. What you're describing is exactly why we have protocols, Captain, so that people don't have to make those decisions in the moment, so that there's a framework to follow even when things go wrong. I understand that, sir. And I follow protocols. I've followed them on every mission since that day. But protocols can't account for every variable. They can't tell you what to do when every option is bad and you have seconds to choose. That's when judgment matters. That's when experience matters. That's when you have to trust the person in the cockpit to make the best call they can with what they know. Admiral Vasquez tapped her fingers on the table thoughtfully. Let me ask you something, Captain. Operation Desert Falcon is going to put you in exactly those kinds of situations. High-stress enemy contact, split-second decisions with lives on the line. How do we know you won't make another call that goes against mission parameters? Sarah didn't hesitate. You don't know that, ma'am? And neither do I. What I can tell you is that I understand what Operation Desert Falcon requires. I've studied the mission brief. I know what's at stake, not just for the people on the ground, but for the intelligence they're carrying. I know that we're talking about information that could prevent future attacks and save American lives. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. If I'm in that cockpit and I have to choose between saving one life or completing the mission that protects thousands, I'll complete the mission. That's the job. That's what we sign up for. But I won't apologize for the fact that 8 months ago, I made a different calculation when both options were on the table, and one of them didn't have to result in death. The room was absolutely silent. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She had laid everything out as honestly as she could. If they pulled her from the mission now, at least she would know that she had been true to herself and to her values. General Hayes exchanged glances with the other two commanders. Some unspoken communication passed between them. The kind of wordless understanding that came from years of working together at the highest levels of command. Captain Mitchell Hayes said slowly. Operation Desert Falcon has 3 alternate extraction points in addition to the primary location. You'll have authorization to choose among them based on your real-time assessment of enemy positions and threat levels. How would you make that decision? Sarah recognized this for what it was, a test, but also a genuine question about her tactical thinking. I would evaluate each location based on multiple factors, she said. Enemy presence and activity, weather conditions. The status of our aircraft and crew, the condition of the assets we're extracting, and the time remaining in our operational window. I would communicate my assessment to command and recommend the option that gives us the highest probability of mission success with acceptable risk levels. And if command disagreed with your recommendation, Colonel Reeves asked, then I would follow their directive unless the situation on the ground had changed in a way that made their information outdated. In that case, I would update them and request authorization to adjust the plan. But you might not have time for that back and forth, Reeves pointed out. You might have to make a call in the moment. Sarah nodded. That's true. And if I'm in a situation where I have to act without authorization, I'll make the decision that best serves the mission objectives while preserving as many lives as possible. That's not about going rogue or ignoring orders. It's about being a pilot instead of an autopilot. You're putting me in that cockpit because you need someone who can think and adapt, not just follow a checklist. Admiral Vasquez smiled slightly. It was a small expression, but it suggested that Sarah had said something that resonated with her. General Hayes leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Captain, I'm going to be blunt with you. There are people in this building who think you're too much of a liability to trust with a mission this critical. They think that what happened 8 months ago proves you can't follow orders when emotions are involved. They want you replaced with someone who has a cleaner record and fewer complications. Sarah's heart sank, but she kept her expression neutral. I understand, sir. Not finished. Hayes continued. There are also people in this building who think that what you did 8 months ago was exactly the kind of judgment and courage we need more of. They think that your ability to make difficult decisions under pressure is precisely why you should be on this mission. He paused, letting the words sink in. I'm not going to tell you which camp I fall into, because frankly, I see merit in both arguments. What I am going to tell you is this. Operation Desert Falcon launches in 72 hours. You're still on the roster as primary pilot. But I need you to understand something very clearly. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her feel like he could see straight through to her soul. If you take this mission, you will be under more scrutiny than you've ever experienced in your career. Every decision you make will be analyzed and questioned. If something goes wrong, if you deviate from mission parameters in any way, there will be consequences. Your career will likely be over. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yes, sir, Sarah said quietly. And knowing all of that, are you still willing to fly this mission? Sarah didn't have to think about her answer. Despite the fear, despite the pressure, despite everything that was being laid at her feet, there was only one response that felt true. Yes, sir. I'm willing. General Hayes studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then you have 72 hours to prepare, dismissed. Sarah stood, saluted, and turned to leave. As she reached the door, Admiral Vasquez called out to her. Captain Mitchell. Sarah turned back. Yes, ma'am. Don't make us regret this decision. Sarah met her gaze steadily. I won't, ma'am. She walked out of the conference room, her legs feeling oddly weak beneath her. The hallway seemed brighter than it had before, or maybe that was just the adrenaline making everything seem more intense. She had been given a second chance, but it came with a weight that pressed down on her shoulders like a physical force. 72 hours until Operation Desert Falcon. 72 hours to prove that she was exactly she claimed to be. The desert night was alive with distant sounds. When Sarah's helicopter lifted off from the forward operating base, the mission clock showed 0200 hours. The optimal time for stealth operations when enemy patrols were typically at their lowest alertness. Beside her in the co-pilot seat sat Lieutenant James Rodriguez, steady veteran with almost as much flight time as Sarah herself. Behind them, the crew chief and 2 combat medics ran final equipment checks while trying to settle their nerves. Sarah's hands moved across the controls with practiced efficiency, her eyes scanning the instrument panel and the darkness beyond the windscreen. They were flying dark, with running lights off and navigation systems set to minimal emissions. The route to the extraction point would take them through 50 miles of hostile territory, skirting known enemy positions while maintaining low enough altitude to avoid radar detection. In her earpiece, she could hear the tactical frequency chatter from the Special Forces team on the ground. Calsane Reaper 6 had successfully secured the intelligence assets and was moving toward the primary extraction point. Everything was proceeding according to plan, which in Sarah's experience usually meant something was about to go wrong. "Command, this is Falcon 1, she said into her mic. "We are wheels up and on. Approach vector. ATA to primary extraction, 26 minutes. "Copy that. Falcon 1, came the response from the operations center back at base. Sarah recognized Colonel Martinez's voice, the mission commander who would be monitoring every second of this operation. "Weather holding steady. No reported enemy activity along your route. Proceed as planned." The helicopter cut through the night air, its rotors creating a rhythmic pulse that Sarah could feel in her chest. She had flown this aircraft enough times that it felt like an extension of her own body. Every vibration and sound telling her something about its condition and performance. Tonight, everything felt solid. The machine was ready. Her crew was ready. The question was whether she was ready. The past 72 hours had been a blur of mission prep, equipment checks, and briefings. Sarah had barely slept, running through every possible scenario in her mind. Memorizing the terrain maps and alternate extraction points, reviewing the intelligence reports on enemy positions and capabilities. She had studied this mission until she could close her eyes and see every detail, but she had also spent quiet moments thinking about the conversation in that Pentagon conference room. General Hayes' warning echoed in her thoughts. If something went wrong, if she deviated from the plan, her career would be over. She was flying with a target painted on her back, and everyone was watching to see if she would mess up. "Falcon 1, this is Reaper 6, a new voice crackled over the radio. Captain Mike Bennett commanded the Special Forces team on the ground, and Sarah had worked with him on 3 previous operations. He was a solid operator who kept his cool under pressure. We have reached primary extraction point and are setting up perimeter. Light enemy probes on our western approach, but nothing we can't handle. Copy. Reaper 6 will be in position in 23 minutes. Sarah adjusted their course slightly to account for a crosswind that had picked up. The helicopter responded smoothly, and she felt a moment of satisfaction at the precision of the maneuver. This was what she was good at, what she had trained years to perfect. Flying wasn't just about operating machinery. It was about reading the air, understanding the machine, and making thousands of tiny adjustments that added up to a successful mission. Falcon 1. This is command. Colonel Martinez's voice cut through her thoughts. Be advised, we're picking up increased radio chatter from enemy forces in your operational area. They may be aware of activity near the extraction point. Stay sharp. Acknowledged command. Sarah glanced at Rodriguez, who gave her a tight nod. Both of them knew what increased enemy chatter meant. The element of surprise was eroding, and the mission window was shrinking. They continued their approach, the terrain below shifting from flat desert to rocky hills. Sarah dropped their altitude even lower, using the terrain to mask their approach from enemy observers. The helicopter skimmed over ridgelines with barely 50 feet of clearance, a dangerous maneuver in the dark, but necessary to avoid detection. Coming up on the valley approach, Rodriguez said, monitoring their navigation. Primary extraction point visible at 2 o'clock. Range 8 miles. Sarah could see the faint glow of infrared markers on the ground, invisible to the naked eye but clear through her night vision goggles. Reaper 6 had set up the landing zone exactly as planned. Everything still looked good. Then her radio exploded with noise. Falcon 1, Reaper 6, contact. Contact. We are taking fire from multiple positions. Enemy forces moving on our location in company strength. This is no longer a covert extraction. We need immediate evac. The sound of gunfire crackled through the transmission, punctuated by the deeper thump of explosions. Sarah's training kicked in instantly, her mind shifting into combat mode, even as her hands continued to fly the helicopter with steady precision. Reaper 6, Falcon 1 copies. What's your status? Can you hold position? Negative. Negative. Bennett's voice was strained but controlled. We're heavily engaged. At least 40 enemy combatants closing from west and north. We can hold maybe 5 minutes, but we need you here now. Sarah's mind raced through the tactical situation. 5 minutes was barely enough time to reach the primary extraction point, even if she pushed the helicopter to maximum speed. But flying straight in would expose them to enemy fire from multiple angles. The entire operation was falling apart. "Command, Falcon 1, she called. "Primary extraction is compromised. Enemy forces in company strength engaging Reaper 6, requesting authorization to evaluate alternate extraction points." There was a pause that felt like an eternity. Sarah could picture Colonel Martinez and the other commanders in the operations center, staring at their screens and trying to make sense of the situation. "Falcon 1, command. Maintain approach to primary extraction. Special Forces backup units are being scrambled to provide support. 8 of 15 minutes. Sarah's jaw tightened. 15 minutes was a lifetime in combat. Reaper 6 would be overrun long before backup arrived, but she had been given a direct order to proceed to the primary extraction point. "Command, Reaper 6 will not survive 15 minutes. Alternate extraction points may provide better tactical options. Falcon 1. Colonel Martinez's voice cut her off sharply. "You have your orders? Proceed to primary extraction. Do not deviate from mission parameters. Acknowledge." Sarah felt a cold weight settle in her chest. This was at the moment everyone had been waiting for, the test of whether she could follow orders even when they seemed wrong. She thought about the conversation with General Hayes, about his warning that any deviation would end her career. She thought about Colonel Reeves and his conviction that she couldn't be trusted to follow protocol. Below her, men were fighting for their lives, including 2 intelligence assets who carried information that could prevent future attacks. They were counting on her to get them out, and command was telling her to fly straight into what might be a death trap. "Falcon 1, acknowledged," Martinez repeated, his tone harder now. Rodriguez was looking at her, his expression tense. The crew chief had gone silent behind them, listening to the exchange. Everyone in the helicopter understood what was happening. Sarah pulled up the terrain map on her navigation display, her eyes scanning the alternate extraction points they had identified during mission planning. Alpha Alternate was a clearing about 3 miles north of the primary location, accessible by a route that would take them around the heaviest enemy concentrations. It would add precious minutes to their flight time, but it would also give Reaper 6 a chance to break contact and move to a more defensible position. "Reaper 6, Falcon 1, she called, her voice steady, despite the turmoil in her mind. "Can you move to Alpha Alternate?" "That's the clearing 3 miles north of your current position." "Stand by," Bennett replied. More gunfire rattled in the background. "That's going to be a fighting retreat through rough terrain. We can do it, but it'll take us at least 7 minutes to reach that location. 7 minutes of combat movement while under fire." Sarah did the math quickly if she adjusted course now and headed for Alpha Alternate. She could arrive just as Reaper 6 reached the new extraction point. It would work. It would get everyone out. But it would also be a direct violation of her orders. "Falcon 1, this is command. What is your current position and heading?" Martinez's voice had taken on a dangerous edge. He knew she was considering something. Sarah's hands hovered over the controls. In that moment, she could see 2 futures branching before her. In one, she followed orders and flew to the primary extraction point, hoping that somehow Reaper 6 could hold out until backup arrived. Maybe they would make it. Maybe everyone would survive. Or maybe she would arrive to find them overrun. The mission failed, and the intelligence lost, along with American lives. In the other future, she trusted her judgment and her knowledge of the tactical situation. She adjusted course for Alpha Alternate and gave Reaper 6 the best chance of survival. The mission would succeed. Everyone would come home. But she would have disobeyed another direct order in a combat zone. Her career would be over, just as General Hayes had warned. "Falcon 1, respond," Martinez barked. Sarah closed her eyes for one brief second, and in that moment of darkness, she saw Marcus Chen's letter. She heard his words about choosing humanity over protocol. She remembered the faces of the soldiers who had told her they would fly with her again without hesitation. She remembered why she had become a pilot in the first place, not to follow orders blindly, but to bring people home. Her eyes snapped open, clear and certain. "Reaper 6, move to Alpha Alternate. We'll meet you there. Move now." "Roger, Falcon 1. Reaper 6 moving." Sarah's hands moved across the controls, banking the helicopter hard to the north. Rodriguez didn't say anything, but he began adjusting their navigation to the new course. The rest of the crew braced themselves for whatever was coming. Falcon 1, you are deviating from mission parameters. Martinez's voice was sharp with barely controlled anger. Return to primary extraction immediately. That is a direct order. Negative command, Sarah replied, her voice calm and professional. Primary extraction is untenable. Alpha alternate provides superior tactical positioning and higher probability of mission success. We will extract Reaper 6 from Alpha alternate. Captain Mitchell, if you do not return to assigned heading immediately, you will face court-martial. Do you understand me? Understood, Command. Falcon 1, continuing to Alpha alternate. She cut the channel before Martinez could respond. Switching to a different frequency to coordinate with Reaper 6, her heart was pounding, but her hands were rock steady on the controls. She had made her choice. Now she had to execute perfectly to prove it was the right one. Reaper 6, Falcon 1. What's your status? We're moving. Taking casualties, but still mobile. Enemy pursuing, but we're maintaining distance. Bennett's breathing was heavy, the sound of a man running through difficult terrain while under fire. How long until you reach Alpha alternate? 6 minutes, Sarah replied, pushing the helicopter faster. Can you make it? We'll make it. We don't have a choice. The helicopter raced through the night, Sarah flying by instinct and years of experience. She could see the tactical situation unfolding in her mind like a chess game. The enemy forces were concentrated around the primary extraction point because that's where they expected the helicopter to arrive. By shifting to Alpha alternate, she was taking advantage of a gap in their coverage. It was risky. It was against orders. But it was also the smartest tactical move available. Approaching Alpha alternate, Rodriguez announced. Landing zone looks clear. Sorrel brought the helicopter in low and fast, flaring at the last moment to bleed off speed. Through her night vision, she could see Reaper 6 emerging from the tree line. 4 Special Forces operators carrying 2 men between them, the intelligence assets. They were running full sprint toward the landing zone while laying down covering fire behind them. 30 seconds. Sarah called. The helicopter touched down hard, rotors still at full power. The crew chief threw open the side door, and the combat medics rushed to help the incoming personnel. Sarah kept her eyes on the perimeter, watching for enemy forces. We've got incoming. Rodriguez shouted. Multiple targets moving from the south. Sarah could see muzzle flashes in the darkness. Enemy forces had followed Reaper 6 and were now closing on the landing zone. The helicopter began taking fire, bullets pinging off the armored hull. Everyone on board. Bennett yelled, practically throwing the intelligence assets into the helicopter. His team followed, still firing as they backed toward the aircraft. We're good. Go, go, go. The crew chief shouted. Sarah didn't wait for further confirmation. She pulled the helicopter up and away, pushing the engines to their limits. More gunfire chased them into the sky. But within seconds, they were out of effective range and accelerating away from the combat zone. Reaper 6 all accounted for, Bennett reported, his voice ragged with exhaustion. 2 wounded, neither critical. Assets secure. Mission accomplished. Sarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Everyone was alive. The mission was successful. She had made the right call. But as the adrenaline began to fade, reality set in. She had disobeyed direct orders in front of dozens of people monitoring the operation. Colonel Martinez had explicitly threatened her with court-martial. General Hayes had warned her that any deviation would end her career. She had just done exactly what everyone feared she would do. The flight back to base was quieter than the approach had been. Rodriguez handled most of the communication while Sarah focused on flying. Nobody said anything about what had happened, but the weight of it hung in the air like smoke. When they finally touched down at the forward operating base, Colonel Martinez was waiting on the tarmac with 2 military police officers. Sarah's heart sank as she shut down the engines and began the post-flight checklist. Through the windscreen, she could see Martinez's expression fury mixed with something that might have been resignation. Well, Rodriguez said quietly, at least everyone made it home. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. She had saved lives tonight. She had completed the mission, and she had probably just ended her career in the process. She climbed out of the helicopter and walked toward Colonel Martinez. Her shoulders squared despite the exhaustion weighing her down. The intelligence assets were being rushed off to debrief, and the wounded soldiers were heading to the medical tent. Everyone was alive because of the decision she had made. Martinez waited until she was standing in front of him before he spoke. "Captain Mitchell, you are confined to quarters pending a formal inquiry into your conduct during Operation Desert Falcon. Your flight status is suspended effective immediately." "Yes, sir," Sarah said quietly. "You disobeyed a direct order in a combat zone," Martinez continued, his voice tight with controlled anger. "You put this entire mission at risk with your unauthorized deviation from mission parameters. I told you explicitly what the consequences would be." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I understand, sir. But Reaper 6 is alive, the assets are secure, and the mission succeeded. I'd make the same choice again." For a moment, Martinez just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then he shook his head slowly. "I believe you would, Captain. That's the problem." He turned to the military police. "Escort Captain Mitchell to her quarters. No communications with anyone until the inquiry board convenes." As she was led away, Sarah looked back at her helicopter one last time. The crew was performing post-flight maintenance, checking for damage and preparing the aircraft for its next mission. Rodriguez caught her eye and gave her a small nod, a gesture of respect from one pilot to another. Sarah returned the nod, then allowed herself to be escorted across the base. She didn't know what would happen in the inquiry. She didn't know if her career was truly over or if there was any chance of redemption. What she did know was that every person she had flown into that extraction zone tonight had made it home alive. And no matter what price she paid for that, it had been worth it. 3 days later, Sarah sat in a small conference room at the Pentagon, facing the same 3 commanders who had questioned her before the mission. General Hayes, Admiral Vasquez, and Colonel Reeves sat across from her, along with Colonel Martinez and 2 officers from the Judge Advocate General's office. The formal inquiry had been brief but thorough, with testimony from everyone involved in Operation Desert Falcon. General Hayes opened a folder in front of him and reviewed its contents silently for a moment. Then he looked up at Sarah, his expression grave. "Captain Mitchell, you were given explicit orders to proceed to the primary extraction point. You chose to disregard those orders and proceed to an alternate location. This represents a clear violation of military protocol and chain of command. Do you dispute any of these facts?" "No, sir," Sarah replied. "You understand that disobeying orders in a combat zone is one of the most serious offenses a military officer can commit?" "Yes, sir." Hayes nodded slowly. "Then perhaps you can explain to this board why we should not proceed with a court-martial and dishonorable discharge." Sarah took a breath. This was her last chance to speak on her own behalf. "Sir, I won't claim that I didn't disobey orders. I did. But I made a tactical decision based on the real-time situation on the ground. The primary extraction point was compromised. Reaper 6 was heavily engaged with superior enemy forces. Flying into that location would have resulted in casualties and possibly mission failure. The alternate extraction point provided a better tactical solution with higher probability of success." "That's not your decision to make, Captain," Colonel Martinez interjected. "Command makes those determinations. Your job is to execute orders, not second-guess them from the cockpit." "With respect, sir, command wasn't in the cockpit. Had information about the tactical situation that wasn't available to you in real time. The enemy force was larger than intelligence had predicted. Their positions made the primary extraction a killing zone. I made a judgment call that saved lives and completed the mission successfully." Admiral Vasquez spoke up, her tone measured. "Captain Bennett, the Special Forces commander, testified that your decision gave his team the time they needed to break contact and reach a defensible position. He stated that if you had proceeded to the primary extraction point as ordered, his entire team would likely have been overrun. Does that change the analysis of whether you should have followed orders?" It was a pointed question, and Sarah could see where Vasquez was going with it. "It confirms that my tactical assessment was correct," Sarah said carefully. "But I understand that correct outcomes don't automatically justify violating orders. The question is whether a pilot should ever be authorized to override command directives based on battlefield conditions that command can't see. And what's your answer to that question? General Hayes asked. Sarah looked directly at him. I think that's why you put humans in cockpits instead of just using drones, sir. It's because sometimes the person on the scene has to make calls that command can't make from a distance. If you want pilots who just follow orders without thinking, you don't need officers. You need autopilots. The room fell silent. It was a bold statement, possibly too bold given the circumstances, but Sarah was past the point of playing it safe. Colonel Reeves, who had been quiet throughout the inquiry, finally spoke. Captain Mitchell has a point, General. We send pilots into combat precisely because we need their judgment and experience. We give them authorization to make tactical decisions within certain parameters. The question is whether Captain Mitchell exceeded those parameters or operated within the spirit of her mission authority. The spirit? Martinez said incredulously. She was explicitly ordered to proceed to the primary extraction. There's no ambiguity there, except that she was also ordered to extract Reaper 6 and the intelligence assets, Vasquez countered. If following one order would have made it impossible to complete the primary mission objective, does that change the calculation? The debate continued for several more minutes, with the commanders discussing legal precedents, tactical doctrine, and command authority. Sarah sat quietly, letting them argue. Her fate was out of her hands now. Finally, General Hayes raised his hand for silence, looked at Sarah with an expression that was impossible to read.
Captain Mitchell.
We've reviewed all the testimony and evidence. We've consulted with legal counsel. We've had extensive discussions about the nature of command authority and tactical decision-making in combat situations. He paused. The board has reached a decision. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. You will be formally reprimanded for failure to follow direct orders during Operation Desert Falcon. This reprimand will become part of your permanent record. Additionally, you will be removed from the active duty flight roster for a period of 30 days while you complete additional training on command protocols and military decision-making. Sarah felt her stomach drop. It wasn't a court-martial, but it was still career-ending. A second formal reprimand would prevent her from ever advancing in rank or taking on high-level missions. She would spend the rest of her military career flying training missions and routine transports. But General Hayes wasn't finished. However, he continued, and something in his tone made Sarah look up. After reviewing the mission parameters, the tactical situation, and the outcomes, this board has determined that your actions, while technically in violation of orders, represented sound tactical judgment that resulted in mission success with 0 American casualties. The intelligence assets were recovered intact, and all personnel returned safely. He leaned forward slightly. Captain Mitchell, you put us in an impossible position. You made us choose between enforcing military discipline and acknowledging that sometimes the person in the field knows better than the person giving orders. That's not a choice commanders like to make. Admiral Vasquez spoke next. But it's also a choice that defines what kind of military we want to be. Do we want officers who follow orders blindly, even when those orders will result in unnecessary deaths? Or do we want officers who have the courage and judgment to make difficult decisions in the moment? Colonel Reeves nodded. The formal reprimand stands. You did violate orders, and there have to be consequences for that. But this board is also recommending you for a commendation for valor and exceptional performance under combat conditions. Both of these things are true. Sarah didn't know what to say. A reprimand and a commendation, punishment and recognition. It was the most contradictory outcome she could have imagined. General Hayes closed the folder. You're a difficult officer to command, Captain Mitchell. You don't make things easy for the people giving you orders. But you're also exactly the kind of pilot we need when things go wrong and someone has to think fast to bring everyone home. He stood up, and the rest of the board followed suit. After your 30-day administrative period, you'll be reinstated to active flight status. Your next assignment will be determined based on where your particular skills can be most effectively utilized. Dismissed. Sarah stood and saluted, still trying to process what had just happened. As she turned to leave, General Hayes called out to her one more time, "Captain?" Yes, sir? Try not to make a habit of this. A small smile tugged at Sarah's lips. I'll do my best, sir. She walked out of the Pentagon, stepping into bright sunshine that seemed impossibly cheerful given everything that had just transpired. Her career wasn't over. It was complicated, marked by contradictions and difficult choices, but it wasn't over. As she made her way across the complex, she thought about Marcus Chen's letter, about the soldiers who had trusted her judgment, about the men from Reaper 6 who were alive because she had made an unauthorized decision. Military protocol existed for good reasons. Chain of command mattered. Following orders was essential to military function. But sometimes, in the chaos of combat, when lives hung in the balance and seconds mattered, the person in the cockpit had to trust their own judgment over everything else. Sarah had learned that lesson twice now. It's a great cost to her career, but at no cost to the lives of the people she was sworn to protect. As she climbed into her car and headed back to base, she wondered what her next mission would be. Whatever it was, she would approach it the same way she approached every flight, with skill, judgment, and an unwavering commitment to bringing everyone home alive, even if it meant disobeying orders to do it.